welcome to the first of our videos looking at different models of negotiation. And this first one is really quite simple to understand. It's probably the way of negotiating that most people think about and visualize, especially if they haven't studied negotiation, looked at any of its underlying theories, or thought about more sophisticated ways in which it might be done. And that is positional negotiation. Positional negotiation is, as it says, very simple in that it's about taking an initial position, expecting that your counterpart will take an opposing position, and then over time holding on as much as you can, depending on the strength of your negotiating position, the strength of your power in the negotiation, and seeing where eventually you get to. So that's really all that there is to negotiation in a positional sense. Spangler says it's a strategy that involves holding on to a fixed idea of what you want and arguing for it and it alone, regardless of underlying interests. So you see the counterpoint there. From Fisher, one of the proponents of principled negotiation, he said, in positional bargaining, you try and improve the chances that any settlement reached is favourable to you by starting with an extreme position, perhaps not a realistic one, but one that you think will be chiselled away throughout the negotiation. You stubbornly hold on to that. You don't give any information away to the other party. You deceive them as to your true views, and you make small concessions only as necessary. And there's a number of consequences to that we'll explore later on. So when we're thinking about our paradigm of interests versus positions, and we've suggested that the richness in a value-creating deal is all about what lies under the line, the interests that support and inform the positions that we take. Positional negotiation is not about exploring those interests at all. We are very much above the waterline. We're very much about shouting at each other across the mountaintops and hoping that one of us will shout louder. What's in favour of positional negotiation? Well, it's very easy to understand, as I said at the start. It keeps things nice and simple. It's a good way of being defensive because you're not oversharing information, you're not giving away anything that could be used later on, making yourself vulnerable, as it were. It can be efficient, it can be very, very quick as a way of dealing. Splitting the difference, for example, you might argue is the end of a positional negotiation. And it can lead to higher settlements, at least for one of the sides. And especially, it's very useful if you are dealing with a weaker opponent. And by weaker, I would mean having a weaker BATNA, less of a strong walkaway position, perhaps being less informed, having prepared less well for the negotiation, not understanding wider market conditions, whatever it happens to be. And in these situations, definitely having a positional view, and perhaps with some of the theatricality and grandstanding that goes with it, you can no doubt get a better deal if you hold, as it were, more of the cards. I think another advantage of positional negotiation is that it seems to be cross-cultural. It seems to be understood in haggling cultures, in bargaining cultures, in all sorts of different parts of the globe. This is a picture from a market that I was in a few years ago in Peru, and certainly the rules of positional negotiation and the use of BATNA and grandstanding and threats and so on were all there and all really easily understood by everyone, whether we spoke a common language or not. On the downside, positional negotiation, because we get entrenched in the position and we hold on to it, it's very much about emphasising the gap between us and the differences between us, and that can have an antagonistic effect, and not necessarily just about the what you're talking about, but how you are engaging in the negotiation as well. It can very much damage relationships. You might win a battle, but what about the longer war? What about the negotiation tomorrow or the day after tomorrow? Other critiques of positional negotiation are that it sees every negotiation as a zero-sum game. For every dollar that I win, it's a dollar that you must lose, and vice versa. Rather than thinking more philosophically, if you like, that actually a negotiation is A, a mutual problem-solving exercise, and B, a way of creating value that we may not be aware is there to be tapped into before we start talking. It can be unpleasant because people adopt theatrical behavioural tactics. They use anger and threats and shouting and so on to try and intimidate the other party into crumbling and giving away concessions in their position and forcing home our own. It's difficult to apply it in complex situations, and the results it can lead to are not necessarily what you might call a wise result. They're not a good deal in the wider sense of that. They can serve the interests of one party, but where the needle stops between the two parties and their initial positions will really be a matter of the arbitrary results of that particular interaction, rather than something that is based on more objective criteria, something that really suits the longer term interests, the mutual interests of both parties. And in terms of that antagonistic effect and the destructive effect of positional negotiation, remember, in a negotiation, we are not only thinking about what we're bargaining over, we are also thinking about how the bargaining is taking place. And positional stances tend to encourage more negative, conflict-driven behaviour, and all of that has the danger of making us think that we're not being treated with respect, that we're not being treated fairly. And the damage that can do, both to our interest in continuing with a given negotiation, but also to the onward relationship we have discussed before and is self-evident as to its destructive effects for our own longer-term interests. Finally, from some of the writers, Fisher, Urey and Patton say again, positional bargaining becomes a contest of will. It really is an arm wrestling contest, if you like. Anger and resentment often result as one side sees itself bending to the will of the other without our own legitimate concerns going unaddressed. And again, this taps into this idea of procedural justice, of being validated, not just for what we're saying, but about who we are. And the bitter feelings generated by this may last a lifetime, they say, perhaps melodramatic. But again, making the point that this might win you the war, this particular negotiation, when you have a stronger position for whatever reasons. But what about the longer term campaign? And what about the positivity of enhancing relationships and creating deals that are of mutual value and mutual gain right into the future?